Hi everyone. Today we're looking at a headline that's shaking up global talks. US officials have called Indians arrogant, a bold claim that's raising eyebrows everywhere. But what's the real story? Is this just diplomatic pressure? Or is it about India's rising power on the world stage? In this video, we cut through the noise, uncover the facts, and reveal how India is changing the global conversation. White House Trade Advisor Peter Navarro recently made headlines by calling Indians arrogant, and his remarks weren't mild. He was reacting to India's decision to buy discounted Russian oil, defying Western pressure. Navarro went further, provocatively calling the Ukraine war this war, blaming India for prolonging the conflict by helping fund Russia through these oil purchases. He also criticized India's approach to sovereignty and tariffs, claiming that India's independent foreign policy hurts American interests, and even urged the world's largest democracy to act like one by aligning more closely with the West. But India isn't backing down. New Delhi is standing firm, prioritizing national interest and maintaining an independent stance on the global stage, even as tensions with the US rise. This clash highlights a bigger question. How far will India go in charting its own path in global politics? India's global strategy is all about balance. As the world's largest democracy, it has strengthened ties with the United States and Europe, signing high-trust agreements in defense, trade, and technology that reflect shared democratic values. At the same time, India keeps strong relationships with more authoritarian nations like Russia, Saudi Arabia, and others in the Middle East. These ties aren't about ideology. They're about security, energy, and economic interests, from joint defense projects with Russia to major energy and infrastructure deals in the Middle East. This careful balancing act, what some call flexible alignment, lets India navigate global power conflicts and put national interest first, rather than being forced into a simple democracy versus authoritarianism narrative. Western criticism of India's oil trade with Russia highlights a clear double standard. India is singled out for buying Russian crude, yet the US and EU keep trading heavily with Russia, importing LNG, uranium, chemicals, and even refining and reselling Russian oil. China's far larger oil trade often goes unmentioned. It's not just about trade. American and European alliances with countries like Pakistan, whose democratic credentials are questionable, are maintained for strategic reasons, while India faces criticism for pragmatic ties with authoritarian nations. India calls out this hypocrisy, insisting global trade should be fair and not dictated by self-serving morality. As it protects energy security and national interest, India is sending a clear message: fairness, not pressure, should guide international relations. Much of the criticism of India's foreign policy comes from ego clashes and discomfort with India's growing independence on the global stage. Some expect India to follow a predictable path, fully aligned with Western interests. But in 2025, India has decisively embraced a muscular, self-reliant, and strategically autonomous approach. This strategy is all about safeguarding national interests, balancing ties with multiple powers without bowing to pressure. India keeps strong relations with Russia and China while deepening partnerships with the US, Europe, and emerging nations. The frustration from critics comes from one simple fact: India doesn't fit the binary global narrative. What some call arrogance is really a confident assertion of sovereignty and strategic freedom, standing tall in its own right, not in anyone else's shadow. In 2025, India's foreign policy is defined by sovereignty and strategic autonomy. Moving beyond the old non-alignment approach, India now follows a muscular, self-reliant path, balancing national interests with global responsibilities. This approach lets India engage with major powers on its own terms, maintaining partnerships with the US, Europe, Russia, and China, while protecting its economic and security priorities. Unlike many allies who align closely with US directives, India chooses independent decision-making. This flexibility allows India to navigate global power rivalries, assert leadership in multilateral forums, and safeguard its sovereignty, all without compromising diplomatic relationships. The US has shown clear selectivity in its trade policies and sanctions, often targeting countries based on strategic interests rather than consistent principles. In 2025, for example, the US imposed sweeping tariffs, including a 25% tariff on Indian exports, partly in response to India's Russian oil imports. At the same time, Other major trading partners like China and Canada received exemptions or reduced tariffs under certain agreements. This uneven approach makes it clear that these measures are about geopolitical strategy, not fair trade enforcement. The US continues to maintain close trade and diplomatic ties with allies, even when they engage in questionable practices, while aggressively penalizing countries like India for pursuing independent policies. This selective sanctioning exposes a calculated use of economic tools for political objectives, raising serious questions about fairness and equity in international relations. The US recently imposed steep tariffs of up to 50% on Indian goods, straining diplomatic ties and marking one of the most serious downturns in Indo-U.S. relations in decades. These measures, triggered in part by India's continued Russian oil purchases and independent foreign policy, have sparked public backlash in India and raised doubts about future strategic cooperation, including defense deals and multilateral initiatives like the Quad. Experts warn that these tensions could undermine mutual trust and complicate collaboration across economic, security, and geopolitical arenas. If mishandled, this standoff may push India closer to other global powers like Russia and China. This is a critical moment, a test of whether both countries can recalibrate and preserve their strategic partnership amid rising global competition. Global perceptions of US foreign policy are increasingly seeing it as biased and selective. Analysts and media worldwide point to confirmation bias and groupthink shaping American diplomatic narratives, often prioritizing domestic political agendas over consistent international principles. This has fueled skepticism about US intentions, with many viewing American tools, whether in AI, trade, or diplomacy, as ways to push specific political ideologies rather than foster neutral cooperation. As a result, the global outlook is shifting. While the US remains a major player, more nations are advocating for a balanced, multipolar world, one that respects sovereignty and diverse political systems, rather than accepting unilateral American dominance. Rising powers like India are demanding fair treatment and recognition of the complex realities of geopolitics beyond simplified narratives. India's foreign policy today is a strong reflection of its sovereignty and strategic autonomy. Guided by pragmatic national interests and rooted in its civilizational values, India balances global partnerships without compromising independence. Even amid complex international pressures, India asserts its right to chart its own course, one that honors its democratic identity and economic ambitions. For Indo-US relations to thrive, it's essential to respect India's sovereignty and build a partnership based on mutual respect, not coercion. A resilient, forward-looking alliance requires moving beyond short-term conflicts and appreciating the legitimate strategic choices India makes as a rising global power. This approach will foster cooperation that strengthens India's dignity while advancing a shared vision of peace, security, and prosperity. Thanks for watching. If you found this analysis insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Policy 360 for more in-depth discussions on global affairs. Stay informed, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next video.